Okay, Mark, take it away.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this final edition of the Ages of Globalization program for higher education. We're very glad to have you with us again one last time, and it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to learn once more from Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Last week, we explored the sustainability imperative, examining how 2 centuries of rapid growth have brought us into a moment of profound environmental and systemic challenge and the scale of coordination required to respond. This week, we turn to Module 10, the new multilateralism and sustainable development to 2050. We'll consider how international cooperation, institutions, and global governance might evolve to meet the challenges ahead. As a reminder, we'll aim to reserve the final 15 minutes for interactive Q&A. Please submit and vote on questions using the Slido link, which will be shared in the chat. If you'd like to be called upon, please include your name along with your question. And with that, it's my pleasure to turn things over to Professor Sachs.
Mark, thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for participating in this journey. We have talked about the history of global scale human interaction, the fact that globalization has been with us as long as we have been human beings. And we've had large scale contacts across the globe from the Paleolithic era onward. We talked about the interactions of technology, geography, and institutions in shaping societies at all ages of globalization, and how the changes, notably of technology, but of course also changes of the physical environment and changes of human institutions and ideas, have reshaped the world. We are in the seventh age of globalization, very much in the digital age. The digital age is everywhere. It's with us as we interconnect from around the world on Zoom today. It's with us, alas, in the war that is raging in the Middle East, which is an AI war, a war of drones and autonomous weapons and AI targeting, a war of devastation in which the latest advances of technology are being displayed. And in fact, one feels that the war is used as part of product development in an awful way. Companies racing to try their new drones and their new weapon systems and their new uh, uh, geospatial identification protocols and so forth. We're reminded that technological change throughout history has been double-edged. On the one side, it's been able to improve living standards, raise longevity, uh, improve the quality of life, but at the same time, it has made war ever more devastating. And we're witnessing that and worried about that even as we speak today. I want to talk today about global cooperation, about multilateralism. Uh, Multilateralism is an ancient dream and still out of reach in important ways. We have not succeeded in making a peaceful, stable, uh, law-based international order. But the hope to do so remains, and the need to do so is more powerful than ever before in the nuclear age, in the AI age, in the uh, period of massive environmental threats, the planetary boundaries being trespassed, as we discussed in the previous module. So the need for multilateralism is paramount. And today I want to explore where we stand regarding this great challenge. What are the core needs for multilateralism? What are the core challenges? What is the role of the United Nations? Where does it work? Where does it fail to function adequately? What should we be doing to build the multilateralism that we need for the future in order to be able to achieve sustainable development, to end poverty, to ensure social justice, to raise living standards, to find a path to peace, and to address the environmental hazards that are around us, but pushed out of the headlines by the yet more urgent facts of life and death in wartime. So this is the topic today. Let me, as always, share a presentation with you, and then we'll have a chance for discussion. I would like to speak about what I call the new multilateralism, the kind of multilateralism that we need for the 21st century and that we find woefully insufficient today. I'll start with the wall on First Avenue directly opposite the United Nations. It's an ancient idea of the prophet Isaiah in the Bible. It is an inspiration until today. It says on this wall across from the UN, Isaiah chapter 2, verses 2 to 4, they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. How wonderful and how distant that idea seems to be when we are beating our plowshares back into swords, when our economies are being remilitarized, when nations are lifting sword against other nations. Remember that the hope of the United Nations, built on an ancient hope, a hope of the prophet Isaiah, is that humanity can move beyond war and can directly transfer economically the focus from war into well-being, from swords into plowshares. Well, today I'd like to discuss how this can be done through 6 steps. First, defining multilateralism. Second, understanding what I regard as the 2 core challenges of multilateralism. First, to stop war, and second, to provide public goods, like the response to climate change. Third, I'll briefly discuss the history of international cooperation in the last 200 years, the ideas about how nations can find a path to peace. Then I would like to introduce the United Nations, our current hope for the world for a functioning multilateralism. I want to discuss in the 5th part of today's remarks regional organizations, which are transnational but not the global institutions. Institutions like the European Union or the African Union or ASEAN, which is a group of 11 countries in Southeast Asia, or Mercosur, a largely trading group in South America, CARICOM, the group of Caribbean countries, and so forth, because these regional bodies are extremely important intermediaries between the UN as a global institution and national governments. And the 6th topic that I want to discuss is UN reform, how to make the UN more effective. So what is multilateralism? It is governance at multiple levels and bringing together uh, political entities, largely nation states from different parts of the world under a common framework of governance. And the main point is we have governance at many different levels. Uh, Sometimes political scientists simplify by saying we are a world of nation states, but this is too uh, crude a characterization of politics. Our political order operates at several different geographic levels. We are almost all of us parts of local government. I am in the borough of Manhattan as part of the city of New York, within New York State, within the US federal government, within what is supposed to be a US, Canada, Mexico free trade area, within the United Nations. In other words, I live under multiple political jurisdictions, local, subnational. In the case of the US, that is a state government. Uh, the federal government, in the case of the US, at the national level, a regional government to some extent that connects the United States with Canada and with Mexico in an economic union that doesn't function very well because of bad behavior by the United States, and at the global level. So there are multiple levels of governance. It is right to say that the national government, the one in the middle here, is the predominant form of government because in many countries, cities are legal entities of the national government. In many countries, heads of cities are appointed by the national government, for example. In many countries, the ability of the local government to tax depends on the national government. Or in the case of New York, the ability of New York City to tax depends on the powers granted by New York State. So the national government tends to be the preeminent level of government in the world today because it's the one with the army. It's the one that is uh, endowed typically with the tax authority and with the highest concentration of legalized force, uh, usually the military. And because of that, the national governments around the world play a predominant role and sometimes even deny the reality or utility of governments at other levels. National governments hoard their sovereignty. They protect their prerogatives, even to their own disadvantage by undermining cooperation that's needed globally. But what we want is an effective governance system in which governance from the local to the global level works properly at every level of governance. And the basic idea is that different levels of government are needed to carry out different kinds of tasks. We need global government to face the crisis of ozone depletion or to face the crisis of global climate change. But we don't really need global government to face the repair of local roads or the operation of primary schools or the policing of communities. We wouldn't turn over to the UN, in most cases, local road construction or local road repair. That would be the purview of the local government. We wouldn't turn over national defense in general cases to the cities within a country. That would be the responsibility of the national government. In a similar way, we shouldn't turn over management of the rainforests or rivers that cut through multiple countries to one national government alone. We need cooperative governance at a regional level. For instance, the Amazon rainforest has 8 countries that are around it and that need to coordinate to protect the rainforest. Many rivers in the world cut through multiple countries. The Mekong River, the Nile River, the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers, the Danube, countless rivers go through multiple jurisdictions, and those jurisdictions can divert the rivers to the harm of downstream countries. They can pollute the rivers. They can mismanage flooding and so forth. They can put on hydropower projects that may help or hinder the well-being of downstream countries. So regional management, and by regional in this case, I mean transnational, is extremely important. And then, of course, as I mentioned, several areas where only at the global level is it possible to govern outer space, the ozone layer, global pandemic preparedness, nuclear arms control, health and management of the oceans or the climate system are global. Managing these different issues from policing and water supplies and local roads up through the climate system, oceans, and outer space are public goods. They are goods for humanity that cannot be achieved by private enterprise operating according to the profit motive. They need to be managed collectively and usually through regulatory systems rather than through market arrangements. But they need to be managed at the level of governance that is appropriate for the particular public good in question. And there's a doctrine which is a very powerful idea called subsidiarity. Subsidiarity says for each kind of public good, assign the government that is at the lowest level, closest to the people, to address that public good that is capable of doing so. But don't assign a public good that requires a higher level of coordination to a lower level of governance. In other words, assign local road repair to local governments, not to the UN, but don't assign climate system control to local governments. Assign climate system control to the United Nations level, and then, of course, some implementation will be carried out at each of the lower levels of governance. The principle of subsidiarity is don't put all the burdens or don't put the burdens at government level that's far removed from the people. Put it at the level of government that is closest to the people, to individuals, but is still capable of addressing the particular challenge. So there are a number of global public goods and public bads that need to be addressed at the global level. Global public goods are a safe climate for the planet, clean oceans, and proper sustainable management of fisheries, the peaceful use of outer space, and also not letting space get so cluttered with the debris of satellites and other human introduced objects that it becomes dysfunctional. So even the allocation of the space in outer space is a public good. Protecting the ozone layer, governing dangerous technologies such as nuclear power or artificial intelligence, uh, preventing nuclear proliferation. These are all global public goods. Aiming to avoid public bads is part of the service of governance at the global level, stopping greenhouse emissions, ending wars and nuclear proliferation, uh, curbing the spread of pandemic diseases like the experience with COVID, uh, pollution of the global commons, such as the plastics that have entered into the food chains in the oceans, financial instability at the global level that comes from illicit money transfers, hiding money, and a shortfall of international financial institutional architecture, or the collapse of biodiversity. These are all public bads that need to be addressed through global governance. And according to the doctrine of subsidiarity, unfortunately, none of these can be addressed properly only at the level of nation states. So, America First ideas of the Trump administration, which are now parroted and repeated by governments around the world, don't really make sense for addressing issues such as those that we're considering here of the global public goods and the curbing of global public bads. There are two fundamental kinds of challenges at the global level. One is to stop war, to stop especially interstate war between nations, such as the war that is underway by Israel and the United States attacking Iran. This attack by the US and Israel is blatantly and brazenly against the United Nations Charter. It's a stark violation of international law. There is, in my opinion, no justification whatsoever for it. It also is an illustration of the relative ineffectiveness of international law right now, because the UN Security Council did not stop and has not ended this war of aggression, which only escalates as we meet today. The other core challenge is providing global public goods. And there is a chronic underprovision of global public goods. All of those areas that I just showed you where global public goods are needed are not being provided at the scale and intensity required to address those issues. The climate crisis worsens, the pollution of the oceans worsens, the destruction of biodiversity worsens. So we're not yet succeeding in supplying the public goods or in curbing the public bads. So these two challenges are paramount. How to stop wars. I could say war and anarchy because it's sometimes said that the world is anarchic in that there is no governance above the nation state that effectively stops their violence. The idea of the UN is precisely to end the global anarchy, to establish an international rule of law. But we can see by the very case of the current war that the world is facing, this war of aggression by Israel and the United States against Iran, that these global institutions are not functioning very well. One could say the same thing about nuclear risks rising, the rise of militarism, and so on. The related challenge is the underprovision of public goods. We're not getting the climate control that we need. we're not actually achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. We're not achieving global social inclusion. We are not achieving the universal human rights that are recognized in the formative document of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of the United Nations. So these are the pending challenges of multilateralism. Let me say a word about overcoming anarchy and war. There are two philosophers that I would like to bring to the table in this discussion. One is Thomas Hobbes. He is a British philosopher from the 17th century. His most famous book is The Leviathan, published in 1641, I believe, if I have that correctly. I think so. Um, and he argued that in the state of nature, in man's natural state, life is solitary, nasty, brutish, sorry, solitary, nasty, poor, brutish, and short. A famous expression from the Leviathan. And Hobbes' idea was that at the national level, there should be a government, a Leviathan, that would stop human beings from killing each other. But his followers in philosophy have said that that state of nature is really the state of nature of nations, nation states. They live in a state of anarchy. They live in a state of nature. And therefore, the life of nation states is solitary, nasty, poor, brutish, and short, meaning that we are trapped in a situation of war of all against all at the global level among nations. A very pessimistic idea, which has become part of the international relations doctrine of realism, which is built on Hobbes's theory. Hobbes's theory that mankind is naturally aggressive, non-cooperative, and even violent, and therefore is subject to anarchic conditions unless there is a Leviathan, a dominant government. But since there is not one at the global level, we are bound to the kind of violence that we're now seeing in the Middle East. On the other side was another great philosopher who lived a century and a half later, the German philosopher Immanuel Kant. He's very important for many parts of philosophical theory, but one was his idea that it would be possible to create a constitution among nation states so that they would live in peace with each other. And in 1795, in a very wonderful and important essay called Perpetual Peace, Immanuel Kant proposed a global constitution that would prevail for the separate nation states so that these nations would live in peace with each other. And that constitution that he proposed is really the forerunner of the UN Charter. He envisioned the idea that there could be a global charter in which countries would join and create a rule of law among themselves to sustain peace. So Hobbes gave a very pessimistic account of the global order. Immanuel Kant gave a much more positive account of the global order, that it would be possible, even with nation states, to create a body of international law. And he said that a state of peace among men living side by side is not the natural state, that's true, but must be established by law. And his idea was that it would be possible to establish such a body of international law, something like the UN Charter. So he was really the intellectual forerunner of the UN Charter. So, what is the history of actual international cooperation? Well, I would date it in the following ways. First, maybe in the modern period, uh, we would start with Kant's essay of 1795, when he argued that there could be a federation of states living together and operating under a rule-based international law. That did not exist in Kant's time. He imagined that it could exist. So in a way, he was a visionary, looking forward to what could come. At the end of in the middle of the 19th century, we had the start of the first international organizations that became eventually the bodies of today's United Nations. So there was first the Universal Postal Union and cooperation on the original telegraph and then telephone to create the first body of, or first international agencies of cooperation for new technologies. At the end of the 19th century, there were several meetings that took place in the Netherlands, in The Hague, that aimed to create an international system of law to underpin peace. And this series of conferences established a court of arbitration. It was the forerunner of the International Court of Justice. It tried to establish laws to prevent war. It didn't work in the sense that the First World War broke out soon afterwards. But these Hague peace conferences were indeed the first attempts to actually implement Kant's vision of a peaceful, law-based order. After World War I came the first attempt at a global institution for peace, the League of Nations. This was the idea put forward by the US President Woodrow Wilson, but ironically, the United States did not agree to join the League of Nations when it was established. The US Senate said that it would not be bound by an international organization, and so it rejected some of the terms proposed for the League of Nations, and the League of Nations was established without the participation of the United States, which weakened it from the start. The League of Nations was not up to the task of preserving peace. It broke down in the 1930s. World War II followed, and in Europe, World War II broke out in 1939. But there were many failures in the 1930s where the League of Nations was supposed to address crises but didn't. Very reminiscent of what's happening with the United Nations now, where there are wars raging around the world, but the UN is not capable of stopping these wars. So here you see on the left the original League of Nations. It's in Geneva. It's now a headquarters for operations of the United Nations for certain UN key agencies in Europe. But it was the original attempt to build the international law. During World War II, the US president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, whom I regard as America's greatest president in history, conceived the idea of a successor institution, the United Nations. And it was already during wartime, during World War II, that Franklin Roosevelt worked with other leaders to uh, create a UN charter that was adopted in 1945 by 51 countries. The idea at the time was that the great powers, and at the end of World War II, that meant Britain and the Soviet Union and China and the United States principally, to which France was added as a fifth uh, major power, would take the co-responsibility to help guide the world to peace after World War II. The problem is that these five great powers ended up feuding with each other and ended up falling into a Cold War, so that the cooperation that was supposed to underpin the UN did not occur. And I call that here the missed opportunity for peace uh, between 1945 and 1947. So the UN was founded with 51 nations uh, with high hopes for a new era of peace. Unfortunately, the world fell into a Cold War, especially between the United States on one side and the Soviet Union on the other side. That Cold War uh, ostensibly ended uh, in the late 1980s and the early 1990s. But unfortunately, the end of the Cold War marked most dramatically by the end of the Soviet Union itself, which became 15 new nations that had composed the Soviet Union, did not lead to a new era of peace. There are many reasons for that. I blame US foreign policy to a large extent, because the United States government, rather than seeking peace, said that the demise of the Soviet Union means that the US now dominates the world. So the US aimed for dominance rather than mutual respect. This is my own interpretation. But what happened was the world went into a new crisis. And we are in that crisis today, with the wars in Ukraine, with the wars in the Middle East, with wars in other parts of the world, with a very low level of trust and cooperation among the major powers. So the UN was created, that's the building on the right in New York City, as the successor to the League of Nations. The UN Charter aims to implement Immanuel Kant's vision for perpetual peace. The UN was created, as it says in its own charter, to end the scourge of war after two world wars. But we see today painfully that the wars are not ended. And even on the uh, other public goods uh, responsibilities of the UN on climate, environment, economic development, we fall far short of the aspirations that the nations have stated. So we can give a kind of ledger of what's working and what isn't working with the UN. There are many successes. The UN is a nearly universal body. In other words, almost every person on the planet lives in a nation that is a member of the United Nations. The UN now has 193 member states. The UN was very important in overseeing the decolonization of countries that gained independence from European empires. The UN oversaw the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted in 1948. The UN, to this moment, has headed off a World War III. The UN has created shared global goals, especially the Sustainable Development Goals. The UN has created many crucial institutions, such as the World Health Organization, the World Food Program, the UN High Commission for Refugees, all vital humanitarian work. The UN created the Montreal Protocol to help save the climate. I'm sorry, to help save the ozone layer. The UN uh, helped to create the Paris Climate Agreement to set global goals for a safe climate. The UN has established a law of the sea under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. And it's created standards and protocols and laws in many other areas, such as civil aviation or telecommunications and postal services. But there are many areas where uh, the UN is not functioning according to the vision. Uh, the UN Security Council is paralyzed. It's not preventing wars. It's deeply underfunded. It lacks authority to collect its own tax revenues. The Sustainable Development Goals are badly off track. Climate change is not being prevented in the way that it needs to be. Countries do not accept responsibility for the past abuses that they have committed. And the UN remains headquartered and focused very much in the United States and Europe, uh, whereas those two parts of the world, the US plus Europe, represent about 10% of the world population, and the UN is very much underrepresented in the other 90% of the world. At the same time as the UN has its successes and failures, we also have another level of governance that has become more important, but is also struggling. And these are the regional bodies. And I want to just mention them briefly: the European Union, the African Union, ASEAN, Mercosur, CARICOM, the Gulf Cooperation Council, which is now in the war zone of the Middle East. These are all regional bodies, and there are others as well, that attempt cooperation among nations at the regional level. They have their successes, but they also are not able to achieve many of the, uh, or to provide many of the key public goods at the regional level that they are responsible for providing. So this brings us finally to the question of UN reform. What should come next? And this is much debated now because there is a widespread sense that the UN needs a UN 2.0. I mentioned some of the issues that are being discussed. First is funding. We don't have funding for global public goods, for fighting poverty, for fighting climate change, even for running the United Nations itself. So we need a system of financing at the global level, not just at the national level. Second, we need reform of the Security Council. It's paralyzed right now. The veto by one of the permanent members, and often by the United States these days, is enough to stop action by the Security Council. We probably need more democratization at the global level. There are proposals for a world parliamentary system, a kind of global parliament alongside the UN General Assembly, which is one country, one vote. The parliament would be more proportional in its representation. I believe we need the UN geographically represented in more places, in campuses around the world, in Africa, Asia, Latin America, so that there's a greater stake of the rest of the world in the UN. And finally, there is the idea that the UN Charter itself should be fundamentally reviewed. There's a clause in the UN Charter, Article 109, which enables the General Assembly to call for a charter review. And there are growing voices calling for Article 109 to be implemented. this would be the opportunity to review all of these changes. Finally, let me say, for effective multilateralism, we need to move from hegemony, where one country like the United States attempts to control the global scene, to true partnership. We need to finance global public goods, and we need institutional reform so that the UN is able to do the job that it is assigned to do. We also need, especially the rich and powerful countries, to accept responsibility for things that they have done in the past and to provide reparations or other kinds of reparative justice for slavery and colonialism, for structural inequalities today, for even their historic greenhouse gas emissions in the past. So these are all areas where global justice and historical responsibility need to be delivered. So in conclusion, we can say that governance must operate at all levels, from local to global. We can say that two of the core failures at the global level are to prevent the war of all against all, the Hobbesian anarchy, and the solving the under-provision of global public goods. We can note the 2 centuries of effort to establish international law. There has been major progress, but it is inadequate and fragile. The UN has major achievements, but it's not functioning properly. Regional bodies are becoming more important, but they also need to be strengthened. And finally, in the years ahead, we need UN reform to make the UN effective so that it can provide the 2 core functions of stopping wars and providing public goods. And there are many ideas on the table for that kind of fundamental reform. So this is our best hope. We need global cooperation. We need peace. The good news is we have the know-how, the technology, the resources to achieve the kind of future that we have declared we want, a future of economic well-being, social justice, environmental sustainability, and peace. What we need is an understanding of how to achieve these aims. We need an ethical mindset to achieve them, and we need to build the institutions that can underpin that effective multilateralism. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, Professor Sachs. We will now transition into the Q&A. I've posted the link if you would like to go and either submit a question or upvote the question you're most interested in hearing.
And let me make one correction at the beginning. The Leviathan by Hobbes was written in 1651, not 41. I apologize for the misstatement.
We got a lot of complaints in the chat about that.
I bet. Thank you.
All right. We'll start with Mariah McSweeney.
I'd prefer Joe. That's my dead name. Slido doesn't allow me to change it. So,
interesting.
Right. With the US and Israel tantruming like small children and running rampant, and clearly no one telling them to sit down and be silent, what's the point of global institutions and global policies if there's no teeth, there's no enforcement mechanisms? We all get to sit here like there's so few people in even the United States alone that want what's going on, but we're all powerless. Why do we have these global institutions if there's no way to enforce the global institutions?
Well, the question of enforcement is really an important question. How do you enforce an agreement? You enforce an agreement, one way is through a global army. That would be a global Leviathan. But the other way that one can enforce a global agreement is through global norms and reputation and actions short of force that humiliate or embarrass or sanction or
Shame.
punish countries that don't behave. And that, I think, is what we should be aiming for. The United States should be shamed and in many ways punished for what it's doing.
Yes.
Israel too, and this I think would be possible, but it's not happening. Uh, and it's not happening in part because the US is very powerful. In fact, it uses its force uh, illegitimately, in my opinion. It has in Europe, for example, military bases all over Europe that prevent, or not prevent, but frighten the governments of Europe from speaking honestly. And so they abide the behavior of like you say, a 3-year-old out of line in the United States rather than calling out the U.S. Illegality for what it is. And this is a major question right now. My own view of this horrible war against Iran is that at least China, Russia, and India, as three great powers, should get together and tell the United States, which is the fourth superpower, you have to stop. This is completely unacceptable. We will uh, we will act in unison to prevent your lawlessness. That, I believe, can be done short of outright war. But even that level of response is not happening right now. There's too much fear of the U.S., and I think it's important to overcome that fear.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe, for the question. Our next question comes from Abhilasha Singh.
Thank you, Mark. Good evening, Professor Sachs. Good evening, everyone. Today I'm not driving, so I'm so happy that I have the opportunity to ask the question to you. So, Professor Sachs, I'm an educator and I work closely with schools. I work closely with young people and also as an SDG advocate in the advocacy space. And the polarization that we are seeing in this world, and I'm so afraid that this is what our children are going to inherit, and what you're teaching our children, will it hold any meaning? So, looking at, especially in the current scenario, I live in Abu Dhabi, and we are facing the brunt of what's happening in the region. Schools are online at currently. We started the new academic year in online distance learning mode. So my question to you is that if we were to redesign school systems today for 2050 world, what three capabilities would you prioritize for students, and what guidance it is there for school leaders, for educators? Thank you.
Thank you very much. First, I would hope that students would understand as much as possible about the world that they are uh, in living in and that they will be leading in. So if it's not taking the ages of globalization, it's studying something like it so that people can understand how the world, students can understand how the world really operates and what needs to be done. Second, I would engage students in experiential problem solving, how they can put solar panels on their schools, how they can help their cities become clean, green, and resilient, uh, how they can solve these problems at the local level. From there, they'll be able to move to solve the problems at the global level as well. And third, I would connect students with students in other places in the world. You're online, we're online. Students in Abu Dhabi should meet students in China, students in the United States, students in Latin America. They could do projects together. You could say that each group project has to have one student from each region. This would really help students to understand the challenge. I see Amanda Ebram on the screen with our Global Schools program. She can help to connect schools around the world so that students have the sense they're part of a bigger world. They can talk with each other. They can talk with other people of different nationalities, races, religions, and actually make friends also, because they'll find that they have a great deal in common. They can talk about the World Cup or their favorite music or anything else, which are global culture. So I think that this would be the third point. I would like to connect the classrooms, see the digital as something that we can really use for enhancing the international understanding. Those are three quick ideas.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Sachs. Thanks a lot.
I'm realizing I have an interview, sad to say, starting right now. If there's one quick question more, I'll take that, and then I will have to excuse myself.
Sure. Let me jump to a question from Bruce Hecht that will help us wrap up nicely. Thank you for building this community and welcoming and inspiring dialogue. What are the next steps?
Thank you. The next steps, I would love to hear from you about how we continue to build this community. You're the pioneers of this. We have SDSN as a global network. We have Global Schools as a global initiative to link schools and teachers together. I'm very excited to do more together with you. We will reach out to you for ideas, suggestions on next steps, ways to move forward. But please do consider us a community now together. Thank you for being a part of this adventure, the first time out with the Ages of Globalization. And I feel very privileged to be together with all of you. Please, we will canvass you for ideas, for thoughts, for suggestions, but I hope for many of us, this is the start of a wonderful friendship. So thanks to everybody for joining in this program.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Professor Sachs.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, Alok.
Bye-bye. Thank you
for your
all.
work.
Bye.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Professor.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.